Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. The air was thick with the hum of ancient engines, the faint whine of a ship far beyond the visible horizon. Dr. Marcus Graves stood at the edge of the ruined city, squinting into the distance as the wind howled, carrying with it the scent of a long-forgotten world. His bones ached with age, his skin stretched tight over his once strong frame. Yet there he was, ready to step into the unknown. He had made a promise, and no matter how much his body protested, he would not break it. The message had come to him in the dead of night, a transmission he couldn't ignore. His once promising career as an astrophysicist had led him to uncover something remarkable, something no one had believed possible. There were other life forms, out there, far beyond Earth's star. But it wasn't just their existence that had drawn him in, it was their desperation. He had seen their faces in the transmission. 2 young alien women, twin sisters. Their vibrant green skin shimmered under the harsh light of their captors, their eyes large and pleading, their lips barely moving as they spoke. They were prisoners held captive by an unknown force. But it wasn't their plight alone that drove him forward. The message had been clear: we are the last of our kind. You must save us. And so, Dr. Graves had taken the risk. He hadn't been the first to attempt rescue, but no one else had come back. Now, standing on the edge of a long-forgotten alien world, he was ready. He only hoped his aging body and his old mind still had what it took. The ship that had carried him here was a relic, a rusted spacecraft that had barely made the journey. But it had been enough to get him across the vastness of space. His only company had been the faint whispers of the twins' voices, distorted by the years and static, but still desperate. The distress beacon had led him here, to the planet Farnath, a desolate world in the far reaches of the galaxy. A place where no one had ventured in centuries. He hadn't expected it to be so cold. The landscape around him was barren, with jagged black rocks jutting from the cracked earth. There was no sign of life, no plants, no animals. Just the echo of wind and the occasional flicker of distant lights. The city was built into the side of a mountain, ancient structures half buried in the snow and sand. It looked like a place that had been abandoned for millennia, untouched by time but not by decay. Everything here spoke of a civilization that had once thrived, now gone. But as he walked, Dr. Graves felt the strange weight of eyes on him. It was impossible to explain, this feeling that he was being watched, but it was as real as the chill in the air. His heart raced. Ahead of him, the entrance to a cave loomed, its mouth large and gaping, as though the planet itself were inviting him in. The twins were somewhere within. He could feel it. He swallowed hard and moved forward, his steps slow but steady. The air was thin, and every breath burned in his chest. His body wasn't what it used to be, and the journey had already taken its toll. But he would see this through. He had to. As he approached the entrance, something moved in the shadows. Dr. Graves froze. His heart skipped a beat, and his breath caught in his throat. Then, out of the darkness, a figure stepped forward. It wasn't one of the twins. It was an alien, tall and thin, its pale skin almost translucent under the dim light. Its eyes, wide and black, studied him for a long moment. "Who are you?" the creature asked, its voice strangely melodic but with an edge of something darker. Dr. Graves didn't flinch. He had come this far. There was no turning back. "I'm here to help the sisters," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "I've come to free them." The alien tilted its head, its black eyes narrowing as it sized him up. "You think you can free them?" it asked, its voice laced with mockery. "You're too late. They are ours now." "I won't let you keep them," Dr. Graves said, his words firm but carrying an underlying tremor of resolve. "They belong to no one but themselves." The alien seemed to consider his words for a moment, its gaze flicking to the dark cavern behind it. Then it stepped aside, allowing Dr. Graves to pass. The movement was fluid, almost graceful, but there was a quiet menace in the way the creature stood, its eyes watching him as though it were waiting for something. Dr. Graves took a deep breath and moved forward, passing the alien and stepping into the dark cave. The cold pressed in around him, and the sound of distant echoes was the only thing that filled the silence. He kept moving, his footsteps now louder in the stillness. As he ventured deeper, he felt the temperature drop, and the air grew thick, almost suffocating. Then, as if in response to his growing anxiety, a voice broke through the darkness. "Help us!" Dr. Graves froze, his heart skipping a beat. The voice was faint but unmistakable. It was one of the twins. He could hear the desperation, the fear, but there was something else too. Something that tugged at his chest. Something that made him want to move faster. "I'm here," he called softly, his voice barely a whisper. And then, a soft light appeared ahead of him, a faint glow that grew stronger as he approached. He followed the light, his pulse quickening with each step. And then, in the distance, he saw them. The twins were kneeling on the cold stone floor, their faces illuminated by the soft, pulsing glow of an energy source embedded in the cavern wall. Their skin shimmered faintly, and their eyes, large and haunting, met his with a mixture of fear and hope. They were beautiful, with features that were both familiar and foreign, familiar in their human-like structure, foreign in their translucent green skin and delicate features. But it wasn't just their appearance that struck him. It was the connection. He could feel it, deep within himself, like a magnetic pull that he couldn't explain. The twins rose to their feet as he approached, their movements fluid and elegant. They were taller than he expected, with long limbs and lithe bodies. But it wasn't their appearance that captured his attention. It was their eyes. Lyra's eyes, the darker violet of the two, were filled with something fierce. Nyra's, a lighter shade, held something more fragile, but no less intense. "We knew you would come," Lyra said, her voice like the wind, soft and melodic. Nyra stepped forward, her hand reaching out, her touch warm against his skin. "You're here, but we have questions." Dr. Graves blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" Lyra's gaze flicked to Nyra, and they exchanged a look that Dr. Graves couldn't quite understand. "We were meant to be freed," Nyra said slowly, "but now we have been given a choice." "A choice?" Dr. Graves asked, his heart racing as the gravity of their words sank in. Lyra nodded. "Yes, a choice. You, Marcus Graves, have come to our rescue. You've brought us hope, but we want more." "More?" he repeated, confused. Nyra stepped closer, her breath warm against his cheek. "We want you, not just as our savior, but as something more. We choose you, Marcus, as our husband." Dr. Graves recoiled, his mind struggling to comprehend the weight of their words. Husband? The idea felt foreign, surreal. He was an old man, frail compared to their vibrant youth. He wasn't sure what he could offer them. But the way they looked at him, their eyes burning with an intensity he couldn't deny, made him wonder if their choice wasn't as simple as it seemed. As the hours passed, the warmth of Dr. Graves' small home provided a stark contrast to the cold desolation of Earth outside. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows on the walls. The elderly man sat by the flickering flames, watching as the alien sisters, Lyra and Nyra, regenerated. Their silver skin, once cracked and bruised from the Zarvani captor's restraints, now shimmered in the soft glow of the firelight. Their features, ethereal and delicate, were beginning to soften as their internal systems healed themselves at an astonishing pace. Lyra stirred first. Her deep violet eyes fluttered open, and her gaze met Dr. Graves, who was quietly observing her from a distance. She seemed momentarily disoriented, then raised her hands as if to examine them, flexing her slender fingers. The old man watched in awe. He had seen many things in his life, but never anything like this. Two beings from beyond the stars, far more advanced than humanity could ever hope to be, yet so vulnerable in this moment. Nyra, her twin, followed moments later. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking as if waking from a long dream. When she caught sight of her sister, their eyes locked for a heartbeat, and a silent communication passed between them. A bond so deep that even words seemed unnecessary. They were truly connected, two halves of a whole, their shared telepathic link a testament to the power of their species. The sisters spoke in unison, their voices soft and lilting but carrying an undeniable strength. "Where are we?" Lyra asked, her voice a melody, though her words were still somewhat fragmented due to the language barrier. It was clear they were trying to make sense of their surroundings, of Earth itself and their circumstances. Dr. Graves, though frail, stood up slowly. His movements were deliberate, as he had long since learned to move with purpose and precision, despite his age. His scientific mind had been one of the greatest in human history, but he never imagined he'd find himself here, facing two beings from the stars, seemingly at the mercy of a much greater force than even he could comprehend. "We are on Earth," he said softly, his voice gentle, as though trying to explain a concept to someone who had never heard of the planet, or what's left of it. It's a place of ruin now. Humanity. We once reached the stars, but we lost ourselves along the way. The world you found yourselves on is a shadow of what it once was. Lyra's expression softened as she processed his words. There was a slight tilt to her head, a gesture of curiosity. Humanity, she whispered to herself, trying to make sense of the word. She had no true frame of reference for it, but she could feel the weight of history in his voice. She turned her gaze toward Naira, who was now sitting up beside her, her sharp gaze filled with wonder as she took in the sparse, dilapidated surroundings. "We've never encountered anything like you before," Naira said, her voice laced with awe. "You're kind. You're unlike any species we've met." Dr. Graves nodded slowly, taking a seat across from them. He was careful not to make any sudden movements that might startle them, though he had seen the flickers of power within them. Their strength was undeniable, yet they were also vulnerable, dependent on his help to escape their pursuers. The thought filled him with a strange sense of pride. "I've spent my life studying the stars, the planets, and the creatures that inhabit them. But even I didn't know what to expect from the likes of you," he said. "You are of another world, and that world is far different from ours. But perhaps it's not too late for us to learn from each other." The sisters exchanged a look, something silent passing between them. They could sense that this man, old, fragile, yet filled with an intellect that transcended their understanding, was more than just their rescuer. He was someone who had a deeper understanding of the universe than they had anticipated. Despite their advanced technology, it was clear that this human had seen and known things they had only begun to fathom. It was Naira who broke the silence. "We owe you our lives," she said, her voice sincere but filled with an emotion neither of them had yet fully explored. She looked down at her hands, which were now fully healed, and then back at Dr. Graves. "You risked everything to save us. You didn't have to." Lyra nodded, her expression serious as she turned her gaze toward him. "You didn't even know us, yet you chose to help us. That is rare in the galaxy. Most would have abandoned us. But you did not." Dr. Graves' eyes twinkled faintly with an emotion that was almost buried under the weight of years. He smiled at them, a faint, wistful smile that spoke of years of loss and solitude. "I've lived a long life. It's been filled with mistakes, failures, and regrets. But there's one thing I know for certain. No one should suffer alone if they can help it. No one should be left in the dark." The sisters studied him for a long moment. There was something in his words, in his presence, that resonated deeply with them. For the first time, they began to understand something about him that they hadn't before. It wasn't just his kindness. It was his wisdom, his grace, his understanding of the universe and everything that lived within it. It was an intangible force that they could feel, even though they hadn't experienced it before. Lyra, who had been more reserved since her awakening, spoke again. Her voice filled with uncertainty, but also an unmistakable sense of longing. "Dr. Graves, we are not accustomed to feelings such as these. Our people, our culture value strength, power, and control. We have never known compassion in the way that you show us. It's confusing." Naira nodded in agreement, her gaze soft but intense. "You have shown us a kind of strength that is foreign to us. We have always been taught that power is the ultimate force in the universe. But now we question everything." The old man looked at the twins, understanding slowly dawning on him. He knew that this wasn't just about saving their lives, it was about showing them a different way. a way that was based on empathy, intellect, and a kind of love that wasn't bound by the constraints of power. "You don't have to understand everything right away," he said gently. "Sometimes, it's enough to simply exist and learn from one another. Maybe that's the first step. The rest, we'll figure out together." In the silence that followed, the bond between them deepened, unspoken, yet undeniably strong. It was the beginning of something greater than any of them could have predicted. The faint hum of the wind outside was the only sound breaking the heavy silence within the ancient stone walls of the abandoned sanctuary. Dr. Graves, Lyra, and Naira had taken refuge in a cavernous chamber beneath the ruins of a forgotten human city. Though the air was cold, the setting was eerily beautiful, as if time itself had paused to watch them. The place, long abandoned, seemed to pulse with its own history, an untouched relic from a time when Earth had been teeming with life and vitality. But in that moment, there was no time for reflection. The galaxy wasn't finished with them yet. The Zarvani, their pursuers, would not give up so easily. The relentless alien race, who had captured the twins in the first place, would stop at nothing to retrieve them, no matter the cost. Dr. Graves, despite his age and frailty, had already begun to assess their situation. His mind was sharp, calculating, even as his body betrayed him with aches and creaks from years of neglect. He had always been a strategist, a thinker, a diplomat who had once navigated the treacherous waters of intergalactic politics with unparalleled skill. Now, in this moment, those skills would be his greatest weapon. The Zarvani had been after the twins for a reason. They weren't just prisoners. They were valuable. Highly valuable. Lyra and Naira possessed unique abilities, powers that could change the course of the galaxy itself. Powers that the Zarvani had been desperate to harness. But Dr. Graves didn't need to understand every intricacy of the twins' abilities to know that their freedom, and perhaps the survival of humanity itself, depended on evading their captors. Lyra and Naira, still healing but more alert now, stood nearby. They exchanged a glance, and in that moment, Dr. Graves could see it clearly, the unspoken connection they shared. They weren't just sisters by blood. They were something more, two beings who were linked in a way that transcended even the physical world. The depths of their power were mysterious, but it was clear that together, they could accomplish things that no one, not even the Zarvani, could comprehend. "We must move quickly," Dr. Graves said, his voice firm. "The Zarvani won't stop hunting you. I've had dealings with their kind before. They don't take kindly to failure. If we stay here for too long, they'll track us down. We need to leave." Lyra and Naira nodded in unison, their violet eyes narrowing in determination. For a moment, the elderly man saw in them the same fierce resolve he had once seen in the young faces of his own people, before everything had collapsed. They were not victims. They were warriors in their own way. Naira stepped forward, her silver skin gleaming faintly in the dim light. "We've been hunted before," she said, her voice cool and controlled. "But we've never been pursued by anyone like the Zarvani. Their technology is advanced and their resources endless. They've captured us once," Lyra added, her gaze unwavering. "But that will not happen again. We will not be taken." Dr. Graves gave a small nod of agreement. He was impressed by their courage, but he knew that courage alone would not be enough to survive what was coming. The Zarvani would bring the full weight of their forces to bear, and the sisters' abilities, though powerful, could not stand up to an entire army alone. They needed to be smart. They needed to outthink their enemies. "I've got a plan," he said, voice steady. "We won't fight them head-on. We'll hide, outwit them, and use the terrain to our advantage. I know these ruins. They hold secrets, techniques left behind by humanity's first explorers, some of which may still be useful." The sisters exchanged a glance. They could sense his resolve. They knew he wasn't just talking to appease them. He was leading them into a course of action that would keep them alive. And that was what they needed. Leadership. "You truly believe we can escape them?" Lyra asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty, but her gaze fierce. Dr. Graves gave her a reassuring smile. "I've faced impossible odds before, and I've made it out alive. I'll make sure we all do." With that, they set to work. The old man began rummaging through the ancient technology scattered around the ruins, pulling out devices that were relics of humanity's forgotten past. Some were functional, others barely more than scrap. But he could make them work. He always had been able to make things work, even when the odds were against him. The twins, though still somewhat disoriented from their capture and escape, began assisting him in whatever way they could. Lyra used her telepathic abilities to scan the area for any nearby energy signatures. Naira, her keen eyes noticing every detail, mapped out potential escape routes. They moved with precision, and for the first time since their arrival on Earth, they began to feel a sense of control. "We need to leave this place before they catch wind of us," Dr. Graves said. "We'll head north. There's a hidden network of underground tunnels that can get us out of the city and into the mountains. If we can get there, we might be able to find refuge, at least temporarily." The sisters nodded, their expressions grim but determined. They understood the gravity of the situation. The Zarvani wouldn't give up easily, but they were not the helpless captives they once were. And with Dr. Graves by their side, they knew that they stood a better chance than anyone could have predicted. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Graves took one last look at the ruins around him. There was a sadness in his eyes as he gazed upon the broken remnants of humanity's once great civilization. It seemed like so long ago that he had stood here, proud of the advancements humanity had made, leading the charge toward a glorious future among the stars. Now, Earth was a crumbling monument to what had been lost. But there was still hope, in the form of two alien sisters, and in the form of an old man who had seen too much but was still willing to fight for the future. He was not ready to give up yet, and neither were they. As they left the safety of the ruins and made their way toward the unknown, the hum of engines and the crackling of energy fields filled the air. The Zarvani were coming, and this time they would be ready. The ancient tunnels beneath the ruined city were cold and silent. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone, mingled with the faint remnants of a forgotten civilization. Dr. Graves, Lyra, and Naira navigated through the narrow passageways with caution. The footsteps of the elderly man echoed softly in the silence, his breathing shallow from the effort. The twins, however, moved with an ethereal grace, their silver skin gleaming faintly in the dim light as they flitted from one shadow to the next. They were powerful even in this strange, ruined world, but they were also keenly aware of their vulnerability. The Zarvani were relentless in their pursuit, and though they had gained a temporary advantage by evading their enemies in the underground labyrinth, time was running out. The faint buzz of the Zarvani's scanners, already closing in on their position, made the air feel thick with dread. As they reached a hidden alcove deep in the tunnels, Dr. Graves turned to face the twins. His brow furrowed in thought, the weight of their circumstances bearing down on him. He could see that Lyra and Naira were restless, as if something was stirring within them, an emotion that went beyond mere survival. "We need to move fast," Dr. Graves said, his voice low. "The Zarvani will be here soon. I'll need to use the old tech to throw off their trackers." But Lyra didn't move. Her gaze was distant, unfocused, as if lost in thought. Naira, sensing her sister's hesitation, watched her closely, her own silver eyes narrowing with concern. Something had shifted in Lyra's demeanor, a subtle change, but one that was impossible to ignore. "We've been running for days," Lyra said softly, almost to herself. "I can't keep running, Marcus. Her voice trailed off, and for the first time since they'd met, Dr. Graves saw vulnerability in her that went beyond her physical injuries. There was something more to this, something deeper. Naira stepped forward, her expression stern but gentle. "What are you saying, sister?" Lyra took a deep breath, her violet eyes locking with Dr. Graves. "I don't want to run anymore. I can't." Her voice was steady now, no longer filled with uncertainty. I feel a connection to you, Marcus. To both of you. There's something between us. Something that I can't ignore." Naira's eyes widened in surprise, though she quickly masked it with a knowing expression. She turned to Dr. Graves, her lips tight, as if to gauge his reaction. The silence between them was thick with anticipation. The implications of Lyra's words hung heavy in the air. Dr. Graves blinked in confusion, not entirely sure what his young companion was trying to convey. "I don't understand," he said softly, though his heart began to race. "What do you mean?" Lyra glanced at her twin for a moment, then back at the old man. "Our species, we have been raised to see strength as the most important aspect of our lives. Power, dominance, control. But from the moment you rescued us, something has changed. We were taught to view humans as weak, insignificant. But you," she trailed off, a deep, almost mournful look crossing her face. "You have a kind of strength I never thought possible. It's not power, not in the way we've been taught to understand it. There's something else." Nyra nodded, stepping closer to her sister. "We were taught to conquer, to fight, to use our abilities to assert control over others. But there's a strength in you, Marcus, a quiet power that transcends that. You didn't just save us. You showed us a new way, a way that goes beyond dominance." Dr. Graves took a step back, his heart racing. His mind, once sharp and analytical, was now struggling to process what the twins were saying. Could it be? Was this truly happening? The thought sent a ripple of shock through him. "You're saying," he began slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're saying that you want more than just my help? That this, what we've been through together, has somehow created something between us?" Lyra's gaze softened, her expression gentle. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with a quiet conviction. "There is something between us, Marcus. It's not just about saving us or protecting us. It's more than that. We are bonded now, not just as saviors and captives, but as something deeper. I feel it in my mind, in my soul." Nyra's gaze held his steadily, her voice unwavering. "We've never experienced anything like this before. You've taught us that there's more to life than conquest and power. There's love. And we're offering that to you, Marcus." Dr. Graves blinked, his mind spinning. He had seen much in his lifetime, but nothing like this. Alien beings, powerful beyond imagination, were offering him not just their gratitude, but their hearts. It was an impossible offer, one that transcended everything he knew about the universe. Yet, in his heart, he felt a stirring, a deep, almost overwhelming feeling of connection to them. He began, but his voice faltered. He couldn't find the words. He had spent his life alone, lost in the ruins of a civilization he had once helped to build. But now, in this moment, the loneliness seemed to vanish. He had been offered something that he hadn't even known he desired, something that no one could have prepared him for. Lyra stepped closer, her hand gently touching his arm, her cool skin sending a jolt of warmth through his frail body. "We know this is strange, Marcus. It's not what we expected, either. But the connection we feel, it's undeniable. We want to be with you, to share this bond with you. You are more than just our rescuer. You are our equal, our partner." Nyra stepped forward as well, her voice softening. "We're offering you a choice, a bond between us, a union that transcends the physical, the political, the galactic laws. We want to share ourselves with you, our strengths, our minds, our hearts. You don't have to accept, but we believe that together, we could change the universe." Dr. Graves, his heart heavy and full, looked between the two sisters. The reality of their offer hit him like a storm, and he knew that this moment was unlike any other. They were offering him a future filled with possibilities, with love, with purpose, a future he hadn't even dared to imagine. He struggled to speak, his voice cracking slightly. "I don't know what to say. I never thought I'd be standing here." Given a choice like this, the twins waited patiently, their gazes unwavering, filled with understanding and expectation. They weren't asking for him to say yes immediately, but they were offering him something rare, something precious, the kind of bond that could change everything. Dr. Graves took a deep breath, his mind racing, and then, with a steadying exhale, he spoke. "Perhaps we'll begin by simply understanding each other," he said, his voice firm but kind. "Let's see where this journey takes us." Together, the sisters smiled, a soft and knowing expression shared between them. In that moment, Dr. Graves realized that this was no longer about survival. It was about a new beginning, for all of them, And so, the bond was forged, not through force, not through conquest, but through understanding, trust, and love. The air in the tunnel grew colder, the darkness more suffocating as the trio continued their journey. Dr. Graves, Lyra, and Naira had made their way out of the labyrinthine network of ruins and were now navigating the steep, rocky terrain of the northern mountains. The sharp peaks loomed overhead like jagged teeth, the snow that fell on them a blanket of cold that only deepened the sense of isolation. The wind howled through the cracks in the rock, biting at their skin, but they pressed on. Dr. Graves was exhausted. His body, though once resilient, was showing signs of wear. His steps faltered occasionally, but the twins were always there, their unwavering support steadying him, guiding him through the treacherous path. Lyra's violet eyes constantly scanned the horizon, while Naira remained ever vigilant, her senses on high alert. Despite their progress, an overwhelming sense of unease hung in the air. The Zarvani weren't far behind. They knew it. The twins knew it. And now Dr. Graves knew it too. The Zarvani were ruthless, powerful, and relentless. They would not rest until they had the twins back, no matter the cost. And if they could not recapture them, they would destroy them. And the old man in their eyes was a mere inconvenience, a human being standing in the way of their conquest. But Dr. Graves had made a promise, and he wasn't about to break it. "We need to find shelter," he said, his voice barely audible against the wind. "The mountain passes are treacherous, and if the Zarvani get too close—" "We know," Naira interjected, her voice firm but laced with concern. "There's an abandoned fortress further up the mountain. It's been abandoned for centuries, but it's well hidden. It should provide enough cover to keep us safe for a while." Lyra turned her gaze toward Naira, her sharp instincts already calculating the path ahead. "Can we make it before nightfall?" "We'll have to," Naira said with determination. "We have no other choice." The group pressed on, determined to reach the fortress before the Zarvani could close in on them. Hours passed, and the mountain air became more biting, their breath visible in the frigid cold. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon when they finally spotted the fortress. An ancient, crumbling structure that had once been a symbol of human might. Now it was little more than a shadow against the mountainside, half buried in snow, its stone walls worn by time and neglect. They approached cautiously, knowing the Zarvani's advanced technology could detect even the faintest trace of energy. Naira led the way, her alien senses alert for any sign of danger. Lyra followed close behind, her mind focused on their surroundings, while Dr. Graves brought up the rear, struggling to keep up but pushing himself nonetheless. The fortress loomed large ahead, an imposing relic of a past that seemed long forgotten. As they entered the crumbling gates, the twins moved swiftly to secure the area, their alien instincts kicking in. Dr. Graves, however, took a moment to catch his breath, leaning against a weathered pillar. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. There was no time to rest. They needed to keep moving to stay ahead of the Zarvani. Lyra approached him, her violet eyes filled with quiet concern. "Marcus, you're slowing down. We need you at your best." He gave her a tired smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine. Just need a moment." Lyra's expression softened. "You've been through a lot, and you're not as young as you once were. You're not just a survivor anymore, Marcus. You're a leader." Dr. Graves winced at her words, though they carried a truth that was hard to ignore. He had been a leader once, back when humanity had still dreamed of reaching the stars. But now those days felt like a distant memory. He was an old man, a relic of the past, and the weight of his age was beginning to catch up with him. "We all need to rest," Naira said, joining them. "But not for long. The Zarvani will be here soon. We've got a small window of time to prepare." Dr. Graves nodded, his resolve returning. "Then let's use that time wisely." They set to work quickly, securing the fortress as best they could. The twins worked in perfect synchrony, setting up traps and barriers, while Dr. Graves dug through the remnants of the fortress's old technology. His hands were shaky from exhaustion, but his mind was still sharp, still focused on the task at hand. There was something about this old place, something in the technology scattered throughout that could be useful. He just had to figure out how to tap into it. As they finished fortifying the entrance, Lyra and Naira sat down near the hearth, their heads leaning against the stone walls as they rested for a moment. Dr. Graves took a seat opposite them, finally allowing himself a breath of relief. For now they were safe. For now they had a small reprieve. But that peace was fleeting. Suddenly, Lyra's head snapped up, her eyes wide with alarm. Naira was on her feet in an instant, her body tense, ready for whatever threat was coming. Dr. Graves felt the shift in the air before he heard it, the low hum of a Zarvani scout ship coming closer. "We're out of time," Naira said, her voice low but urgent. "They're here." Dr. Graves stood up, his tired body protesting, but he didn't have time to linger on his pain. He scanned the room, trying to think of a way to buy them more time. "We need to move deeper into the fortress. There are tunnels, old escape routes. If we can make it there, we might stand a chance." Lyra was already moving toward the back of the fortress, her speed and agility far outpacing Dr. Graves. "Lead the way, Marcus. We'll cover you." The old man nodded, his mind racing. He had been in tight spots before, but this felt different. The Zarvani had closed in faster than he'd anticipated. There was no more room for error. With the hum of the scout ship growing louder, they made their way deeper into the fortress, hoping that the old passageways would be enough to keep them hidden. The Zarvani were closing in, but for the first time since the twins had arrived on Earth, Dr. Graves felt something inside him. Something beyond the fear, beyond the exhaustion. It was hope. The hidden tunnel system beneath the fortress was dark, claustrophobic, and winding. The walls were cold stone, damp with the weight of centuries. Dr. Graves led the way, his eyes scanning every inch of the passage ahead. The faint glow of a forgotten torch provided just enough light to see, but it cast eerie shadows against the walls, amplifying the tension that hung thick in the air. Behind him, Lyra and Naira followed silently, their every movement precise and deliberate. The low hum of the Zarvani scout ship still echoed through the fortress, closer now, its presence a reminder of how little time they had left. Dr. Graves could hear the faint metallic creak of the ship's landing gear as it settled somewhere above the fortress. His heart raced with urgency, but he kept his pace steady, guiding the twins deeper into the network of tunnels. The passageways were ancient, designed to protect against invasions long forgotten, but even ancient technology could only do so much against the relentless Zarvani. "We can't afford to wait much longer," Naira whispered, her voice echoing softly off the stone walls. "They'll be down here soon enough." Dr. Graves nodded, his breath coming in sharp gasps as the cold air clung to his lungs. His old body ached with every step, but he pushed through it. There was no room for weakness now, not when the stakes were so high. "We'll reach the underground caverns soon," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "From there, we'll be able to move undetected." Lyra's violet eyes flickered with doubt, but she didn't question him. She trusted him, just as he had come to trust her. And Naira, they weren't the same as when he first met them, those alien sisters, cold and calculating, bent on their survival. Now they were his partners, his allies, and in some strange way they were his family. Still, he knew their bond wasn't enough to guarantee survival. They would need more than trust to evade the Zarvani. They needed a plan. They reached a narrow chamber, its ceiling low and jagged, forcing them to hunch over as they moved. The walls were covered in strange, forgotten symbols, remnants of an era that even Dr. Graves couldn't place. The air was heavier here, thick with the scent of long-dead earth. But this was where the tunnels split into the caverns, where they would make their stand. "We're almost there," Dr. Graves said, his voice barely above a whisper. He motioned for the twins to follow him to a small alcove in the stone wall. From here, a narrow opening led down into the larger cavern system. The walls were slippery with moisture, and the sound of distant dripping water reverberated off the stone. As they approached, Dr. Graves suddenly stopped. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and he turned back to face the twins, his expression grave. "They've found us," he said softly, his tone sharp with dread. The twins immediately tensed, their senses alert. Lyra's face hardened, her body language shifting from passive to combat-ready. Naira stepped forward, her eyes scanning the shadows. "I'll hold them off," Dr. Graves said quickly, stepping into the opening. "You two get to the caverns and keep moving. There's a secondary tunnel leading to an old mining facility about a mile north. It's our best shot." Lyra shook her head, her face determined. "No, we're not splitting up." Before Dr. Graves could protest, Naira spoke up. "We'll fight alongside you. The Zarvani can't be allowed to capture us again." He hesitated for a moment, weighing their options. The Zarvani were closing in fast, and if they split up now, they risked being overwhelmed. But if they stayed together, there was a chance they could fight back. He wasn't sure they had enough firepower or resources to defeat the Zarvani head-on, but they had no other choice. "Fine," he said reluctantly, "but we need to be quick. They won't hesitate to kill us." Lyra stepped closer, her violet eyes glowing with a fierce intensity. "We will not die today." Dr. Graves nodded. There was a fire in her that matched his own. Something unyielding, a resolve to survive that no one could break. He had seen it before in his own people, but now it was reflected in these alien sisters. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that same spark of hope within him. They crouched low, their footsteps light on the cold stone, making their way toward the entrance of the cavern. The Zarvani were close, their voices faint but growing louder, their foreign language sharp and guttural as they searched the fortress. The cavern entrance loomed ahead, a jagged archway that led into the heart of the mountain. As they neared it, they could see the faint glow of the scout ship's landing lights shining through cracks in the stone. The Zarvani were preparing to make their move. "We're almost there," Dr. Graves muttered. Suddenly, the sound of metal scraping against stone echoed through the tunnel, followed by the unmistakable click of boots on stone. The Zarvani had breached the fortress. "They're here," Lyra whispered, her voice low and controlled. "We can't outrun them. We'll have to fight." Dr. Graves turned to face the twins. "Stay close. We can't afford to be separated." Lyra and Naira nodded, their expressions steely with resolve. Together they would make their stand. The first Zarvani soldier appeared at the entrance of the cavern, tall and imposing in his black combat armor, his face hidden behind a visor. He was scanning the area, unaware that they were so close. But his sensors, advanced as they were, would not miss them for long. Lyra was the first to act. In a blur of motion, she flung herself toward the Zarvani soldier, her silver skin shimmering with unnatural grace. Her hands moved faster than the soldier could react, her powerful telekinetic abilities locking him in place, lifting him off the ground. Before the soldier could recover, Naira followed suit, her body a blur as she darted toward the group of approaching soldiers. Her movements were precise, deadly. A flicker of energy erupted around her hands, the force of her telekinesis sending shockwaves through the cavern walls. Dr. Graves took a deep breath, his heart pounding. It was time. He reached for an ancient weapon hidden in the shadows of the tunnel, an old human-made energy rifle that still hummed with life, though it had long been discarded as obsolete. He had always been a pacifist, but now, in this moment, he felt the weight of his decision. He raised the rifle, aiming it at the approaching Zarvani soldiers, and fired. The blast rang out, a loud crack that reverberated through the cavern. The energy shot hit the lead soldier, sending him staggering back. The twins fought fiercely at his side, their combined power pushing the invaders back. But the Zarvani were relentless. And this fight, though they had the advantage for now, was far from over. The battle erupted in a flurry of motion. The Zarvani soldiers, momentarily stunned by the unexpected attack, quickly regained their composure. Their advanced armor shimmered with energy shields, absorbing the brunt of Lyra and Naira's telekinetic blasts. But the force of their powers still made them stagger back, struggling to keep their footing on the uneven cavern floor. Dr. Graves, clutching the old energy rifle, took another shot, this time aiming for the soldiers' weak points, places where the armor was thinner. The blast hit one soldier in the side, sending him crashing into the stone wall. But there were more coming, and the sound of their boots echoed louder, each step drawing them closer to the heart of the fight. Lyra moved fluidly, a blur of silver as she intercepted another soldier, her telekinetic field surrounding her, an invisible wall of power that sent enemies flying with a single thought. Her focus was sharp, her violet eyes glowing with an intensity that matched the desperation of the situation. Naira, ever the strategist, took a different approach. She was weaving between the soldiers, using her agility and speed to outmaneuver them, her hands glowing with an eerie, unnatural energy as she incapacitated each soldier she touched, sending them crumpling to the ground like ragdolls. Dr. Graves aimed again, his hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. But he was driven by the overwhelming need to protect the twins. They had become his family, his responsibility, and no matter the cost, he would not allow them to be taken. He fired another shot, this time at a soldier's head. The impact sent sparks flying as the helmet shattered, and the soldier collapsed with a strangled cry. But the Zarvani weren't finished. They were relentless. "Marcus, fall back," Lyra shouted, her voice strained but commanding. She and Naira had been pushing the Zarvani back, but the sheer number of soldiers was overwhelming. More Zarvani were pouring into the cavern, their bodies moving with deadly precision, each one trained to fight until their last breath. The twins' powers were immense, but even they were beginning to tire under the onslaught. Dr. Graves knew that the battle was turning against them. The rifle in his hands, though effective, was becoming less reliable as his strength waned. He dropped to one knee, his breath ragged, his mind racing for a solution. The Zarvani were closing in, but there was no more retreating. They were at the precipice now. This was their last chance. "Lyra! Naira!" Dr. Graves called out, his voice breaking through the chaos of battle. "We need to get to the escape tunnel now. The mining facility is our only chance." Lyra, bloodied but undeterred, caught his eye and nodded. "Cover us, Marcus," she commanded, her voice resolute. The twins, despite their exhaustion, pushed forward, their bodies working as one to clear the remaining soldiers out of their path. With a snap of Lyra's hand, the ground beneath the nearest group of soldiers cracked, sending them tumbling into a deep fissure. Naira followed up with a series of rapid, controlled bursts of telekinetic energy, disarming the remaining soldiers and leaving them unconscious or too disoriented to continue their pursuit. Dr. Graves took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he adjusted the rifle, his mind frantically calculating the best way to slow down the Zarvani. He couldn't let them follow the twins. He couldn't let them catch up. He turned to face the approaching soldiers, raising the rifle one last time. The cavern walls felt like they were closing in around him, and in that moment, he knew what he had to do. His heart raced, but there was no turning back now. With all the strength he had left, Dr. Graves activated the rifle's power pack, flooding the chamber with a pulse of raw energy that reverberated through the cavern like a shockwave. The Zarvani soldiers in the immediate vicinity were thrown back, their energy shields flickering and failing under the force of the blast. The impact staggered him as well, and for a moment he thought he might collapse from the effort. But it had given the twins the opening they needed. "Go!" Dr. Graves shouted, his voice hoarse. Lyra and Naira sprinted toward the escape tunnel without a second glance, their silvery forms a blur against the shadows. The sound of their footsteps was muffled by the distant roar of the collapsing Zarvani forces. But Dr. Graves didn't look back. His pulse was hammering in his ears, and he could feel the energy draining from his body. The last of the soldiers fell to the ground, the energy pulse from the rifle ripping through the air with a deafening crack. The Zarvani were retreating, their plans thwarted for the moment. But Dr. Graves knew that it wouldn't last. The Zarvani would regroup, they would send reinforcements, and they would be back. They had no choice but to keep moving. He staggered toward the entrance of the escape tunnel, the rifle now hanging limply from his arm. His legs felt like they would buckle beneath him, but he pushed on, fueled by sheer willpower. The twins were his responsibility, and he wasn't about to fail them. As he reached the opening, the sound of distant engines filled the air. Zarvani reinforcements were already arriving. His heart raced, panic surging through him. But before he could take another step, Lyra and Naira appeared at the tunnel's edge. Their faces were grim, their eyes wide with concern. But there was something else there too, determination. "We're almost there," Naira said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Keep moving. We'll take care of the rest." Lyra, ever the silent leader, stepped forward and helped Dr. Graves into the tunnel. With her assistance, they moved quickly, the entrance to the old mining facility just ahead. The Zarvani were close, but they had bought enough time. Dr. Graves' vision blurred as he pushed forward, exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him, but he didn't stop. Not now. Not when they were so close. The air grew colder as they descended deeper into the mountain's heart. But he could hear the reassuring sound of machinery whirring to life. The facility's old engines, powered by forgotten technology, had been dormant for centuries, but now, they hummed with life once more. The twins led him to a control station, where Naira quickly accessed a series of ancient consoles. With her superior knowledge of alien technology, she was able to initiate the emergency protocols, overriding the system's safety locks and bringing the facility back online. "We're in," Naira said, a brief but triumphant smile flashing across her face. "We're safe for now." Dr. Graves, his heart still racing, collapsed into a nearby chair, his mind too weary to process anything more. The battle had been won, but only for the moment. They were alive. They had escaped. And that was all that mattered. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stellar HFY content. Ring that bell to stay updated, and we'll see you next time.